Hey, how's it going, everyone? Thanks for joining me on a new episode of the Music Reviewer Podcast. Today we're doing episode 39 of the album review series, and today's album is going to be covering the latest album by the band Nothing, titled The Great Dismal. The Great Dismal was released on October 30th, so, almost about 2 weeks ago now. The good old American rock band shoegaze sort of outfit, Nothing, is on the docket today. But yeah, if this is your first time listening to the Music Reviewer Podcast, welcome. My name's Josh. I just cover music, albums, stuff like that. I also have a weekly series where I cover all new entries into the Billboard Hot 100 if you're into more pop, mainstream music. But anyways, before we get started, I want to let everyone know that there's a new album review that went up a few days ago from the artist Dorian Electra, titled My Agenda. I thought that was a pretty cool album. Dorian Electra is sort of this up-and-coming pop artist with a very eccentric style, but I would recommend the album to anybody. And also, if you have some time, check out the review too. Also, if you missed last week's Best and Worst Track of the Week, it was Luke Combs versus the Kid Laroi. Also covered some tracks from Lil Big Town, Jhené Aiko, Ty Dolla $ign, Post Malone, Jack Harlow, Ariana Grande, Farruko, and Joel Corey. I think a couple other artists. If you're interested in my thoughts on some tracks by those artists, go ahead and check out that episode of Best and Worst Track of the Week. There will also be another one dropping right after this episode, though. That's going to be heavily based around Positions by Ariana Grande. So if you wanted a Positions review, you're basically going to get it this week. But yeah, let's go ahead and get started on this album review. So The Great Dismal is an album by the American rock band Nothing. Formed in 2010. In my opinion, they're a band with lots of shoegaze leanings, though, but I don't think calling them a rock band is entirely wrong. Their debut album, Guilty of Everything, was released in 2014. Founding member Dominique Palmero released a demo all the way back in 2011 titled Posh Lost after a troubled number of years after being depressed. And also after a series of lineup changes, the band went on to release 2 EPs in 2012. And in 2013, the band was signed to Relapse Records. On an interesting note, in 2013, Nothing also toured with the band Were and ended up forming a little side project them titled Death of Lovers. And also Were member Nick Bassett, also of Deaf Heaven fame, joined Nothing on bass guitar for a number of years. And I thought that was something pretty interesting, especially since Nothing has shoegaze leanings. If you're not familiar with the band Were, they were sort of controversial in the 2010s, but among the shoegaze community, they're considered as to being one of the best neo-shoegaze bands that came out in the 2010s, despite being so controversial. Basically, the band was just formed by a bunch of immature dudes that didn't care what they posted on social media and were amongst one of the first bands to get canceled for saying stupid shit. But anyways, Were, I think overall their brand of shoegaze is nice. I am a fan of them myself. I went to see them one time in college when they stopped through the town I went to college in. But yeah, I thought that was just an interesting thing to point out, since the band kind of formed a side project and kind of formed a relationship, especially with Nick going to play bass guitar in Nothing for a number of years. He has since quit, though. But yeah, I thought when Word came out, I thought their debut album, I think Sway, that's a track, an album that's stuck with me over the years. It's a classic shoegaze album, in my opinion, and the band's kind of since been disbanded. I don't think there's any interest among the members to really do much, although they did do one last album a couple years ago that I don't think they toured behind either, though. But yeah, if you get down to it, I think Were and Nothing, both respectively being shoegaze bands, I just think they're not too similar, in the sense that Nothing kind of holds like this more accessible sound to them. Even though when I went back to the 2018 release, Dance on the Blacktop, I couldn't help but notice the album sounding starkly different from The Great Dismal. For one, the production, especially on the drums, sounds night and day, with the drum tracks on the Great Dismal sounding completely programmed at times and on the forefront of the sound in comparison to the drum tracks being buried on Dance on the Blacktop. The guitars also, in my opinion, sound a little bit more riffy as well, as opposed to the typical shoegaze wall of sound you got on Dance on the Blacktop. In terms of production, there is like a washed out nature found on a lot of the instruments on Dance on the Blacktop, especially, like I said, like in the guitars. I don't really get the same effect when listening to the Great Dismal, and this new album has a huge sense of being a little bit more accessible, with a lot of more clear production and songwriting that would seem to fit like into a radio rock aesthetic. It's like bands, modern hard rock bands, for instance, that like are on XM Octane. Overall, I don't think I enjoy Dance on the Blacktop more than Great Dismal. I did like the dynamic nature of certain tracks, like Hope is just another word for, or Hope is just another word with a hole in it. I thought that track was one of the more interesting tracks on Dance on the Blacktop, but you're immediately just given a completely different sound on the opening track, A Fabricated Life, that immediately just sounds more colorful, in my opinion. And on A Fabricated Life, we get like this down-tempo track, some soft vocal performances accompanied by a dry and crispy guitar tone. The track develops into a more ambient and a nature with like decent textures that cover the entire track, and some reverb guitar effects that chime in. This track kind of has like the same development and pacing of a track like Hurt by Nine Inch Nails. There's also this cathartic buildup that really aims for like this grandiose moment and when we get to that grandiose moment, there's some string textures that have come in and completely dominate the mix. It's an ambitious moment on the album. It's even a little uncharacteristic of the band, especially when taking into consideration the previous album. The end is also a warm decay that I think is probably the best moment on the track. The next track I did enjoy as well, titled Say Less. There's an obvious return to like this classic shoegaze aesthetic. The guitars sound more chaotic but colorful. The drum groove here is energetic and interesting. It seems like this track goes for like a slight radio rock nature in the chorus. There's some wailing guitar effects in the instrumental interludes that are eerie and exciting, and I wish there was a little bit more low end on the more cluttered moments in the mix, but when the bass does come through, it's gritty and it's fitting for the track. I did enjoy this track, Say Less. The next track after that, April Haha, wasn't quite a highlight for me, but I did enjoy the more My Bloody Valentine type of shoegaze with this overblown, heavy and distorted guitars that even sound a bit like early Smashing Pumpkins or even Deftones. It definitely has some 90s flavor to it. But unfortunately, the track doesn't seem to carry with it the same amount of energy that the track Say Less had. But the next track, honestly, is a good highlight as well, Catch It Fade. There's more of a return to some crispy and cleaner guitar tones that structure the track, like in the opener. And this track has more of a upbeat and bouncy nature to it. There's some hints of emo in here. And honestly, this track reminds me a bit of Movements, especially the stuff that was on their latest album. And I think there's a good reason for that. The producer on here was Will Yip. He's a prominent rock producer, an engineer that I think touched some of Movement's work as well. So the similarities are quite apparent. The ultimate build-up on this chorus, where we ultimately have like distorted guitars, is a nice moment as well. There's a guitar solo afterwards that's very 90s. As well, like copy and pasted straight from rock songs from that era. The catchiness and timing of the chorus is probably the best moment thus far on the album. It sounds very like accessible and radio rock friendly, which really isn't a bad thing. I think this is good. I've seen multiple bands this year go for that, and it's stuck, such as Heinz. The next track I thought was also pretty interesting, Feminist Salem. There's a huge return to some more 90s rock aesthetics here. It sounds like a straight up Smashing Pumpkins riff here when the opening riff comes in. Think like cheer up rock. And I love the muddied up grittiness of the bass in this mix as well. There's some melodic guitar lines in the chorus here that like also soar over the track and are a nice touch. And I wish this track kind of like accentuated a little bit more of those kind of sonic elements. but unfortunately it didn't delve too much into that. And the track definitely has a typical wall of sound you expect like on any shoegaze track, so it very much feels like a shoegaze track. The next track after that, Bernie Sanders, was probably the sore thumb of this album. It wasn't bad, but it definitely stuck out. We're immediately greeted by a nice drum groove on the opening that opens this track, and there's immediately like some sort of psych rock influence here, especially in the opening guitar riff. There's a tightness of the bass groove playing off of the opening guitar riff here that's also creates a very nice moment. It honestly sounds like a song you'd hear at like a dingy college show with some local bands playing at a dive bar. It's close to the last set of the night and you're really fucked up. I get that exact same feeling listening to this track. I like the track a lot, but it didn't hit as hard as like what after several more listens. So I'd say it didn't really pay off the more I listened to it. But immediately we get another highlight after that track called In Blueberry Memories. I think this is the best track on the album. Immediately you're greeted with like a nice melodic motif in the vocals that is used throughout the rest of the track. And there's a dark and mysterious nature to this track that I like. Some soft vocal lines, along with the abrasive instrumental that creates like this lovely contrast that I really dig. The soaring guitar lines here in the interludes are great as well. There's some hints of radio rock that show up here as well. I think the band does a great job thus far on the album, accomplishing a sort of accessible nature, like I pointed out earlier. But they also keep their edge and artistic intent, I think. And it's one of my, like I said, it's one of my favorite tracks on the album. Also the ending, the decay and come down of this track is quite good as well. Heading into like the latter part on Blue Mecca, I didn't think this was a highlight. I thought I was pretty indifferent to this. There is a transition that comes from Blueberry Memories onto this track that I thought was good. But the presence of the synth textures that are quite dominating on this track, it creates a bit of an eerie color and can maybe be a bit of an uncomfortable listen. But other than that, I'd say the track's fine. The track after that, Just a Story, I thought was pretty good as well. There's a nice groove that opens up this track. Return to typical shoegaze aesthetics here, definitely. I love the sludginess of the guitar tones that are presented here, and there's some soaring melodic guitar lines as well that are quite good. The overall sound of the track, I think, is best when there's like a soft whisper in the vocals, opposed to like opposite of like the abrasiveness of the track. I really like that contrast, and there's some really gritty and abrasive guitar moments on this track that I enjoy. Finally, we're at the end of the album with the last track, Ask the Rust. This track has some nice arrivals that bring some lighter textures compared to the rest of the album. This track honestly features like more typical 90s shoegaze aesthetics here, mainly found in the guitar work. There is some contrast towards the end of the track, especially in the end when we get some cleaner guitar tones and in an interlude section that goes back and forth between this dirty and haunting guitar sound until the track eventually decays. And I kind of wish the album ended differently, but I'm indifferent on this track overall. The angelic harmonies on this track with the vocals are a nice touch, though. I did enjoy those that element of the track. Also, the lead guitar riff on here kind of sounds like a Foo Fighters one, but it wasn't that obvious, I guess. And I thought overall this was a good album. I definitely thought it was an improvement from their last effort as well. And I don't really know, I'm torn on this album. Nothing is supposed to be one of these rock bands that definitely is considered a modern shoegaze act that is kind of putting the genre to I guess, forefront in this day and age. But this is really strange to me because this album feels more than just shoegaze. It kind of feels like it's this accessible rock album that has potential to get pretty big among people that don't even listen to shoegaze, which I think that's great. I think ideally any album shouldn't be confined to any genres. And I kind of think that's like what separates Nothing from a band like Were kind of just taps into like this typical underground, I guess, following that likes Were because they're just dudes that know how to make good shoegaze music. I think Nothing's kind of getting past that point, which is pretty cool in my opinion. I don't think this is like a great album though. I could have done without tracks like Blue Mecca, the closing track, Ask the Rust. And maybe ultimately I would have just liked hearing an album that was more centered around the sound we got on Blueberry Memories. But ultimately I'm happy I listened to this album and I reviewed it. I would give it a 6 out of 10. Didn't enjoy it as much as like other things I've given a 7. That's the only reason I'm giving it a 6. But I thought it was a solid effort by the band. I would say anyone that enjoys shoegaze or enjoys just like some pretty good polished up rock music is probably going to like this album or like moments of this album. There are moments that maybe drag out a little too long. So if you're looking for cuts that are just very simple, you might not get that enjoyment from this. But yeah, if you stuck around to the end of this review, thanks for joining me. I'm the music reviewer. I'll be reviewing some music soon. If you're enjoying the podcast, if you're on YouTube, like and subscribe. Give me some feedback, good or bad as well. But anyways, thanks for tuning in. I'll see you guys later.